Welcome back. Today we will look at chapter 11 of The Art of War, titled The 9 Kinds of Ground. So, you might be wondering why we need a chapter on the 9 kinds of ground, since we just talked about ground in the previous chapter, the forms of terrain. And you're not alone. If you look at the comments, particularly the translator's comments there, this is a question that has been raised by a few different commentators. And there's not a good answer. There are differences between the sorts of grounds that are going on between these two chapters, but it might be a little bit covered territory. I used that joke last time, sorry, but I'm going to use it again. It's covered territory, and we just have to bear with Sun Tzu as he's repeating himself. Okay, another thing that's sort of curious about this chapter is the fact that there's a lot more going on in the chapter besides talking about the 9 kinds of ground. We get sort of a more psychological look at the general and also at the troops, and there's other sorts of things with plunder and so forth that seem a little bit more than what we're promised within the chapter's title itself. So be aware that that's going on too. One of the kinds of grounds which I wanted to call your attention to is scattering ground. If you're looking at the commented version, this is on page 266. When the feudal lords fight on home territory, that is scattering ground. So why is it called scattering ground on home territory? The idea is that you can, the soldiers can leave at any moment. You know, your family's at home, your little kids, and somebody might be making dinner for you and so forth. And so it's hard to sit around in a trench with a bunch of guys, or with your weapons and your stinky armor and so forth, and sort of keep this battle mentality when you're at home. You could also consider a sort of home court disadvantage. So within a lot of sports, you'll have athletes talk about having home court advantage, and this is a sort of a factor that always comes to be within sports when they're playing at home, but it's hard to say exactly what's going on. It's not quite quantifiable, but it's just the fact that when you're being cheered instead of being booed, when you have sort of a sympathetic and supportive audience versus people who want you to lose, that you are able to perform better. And this statistically has been proven, so to speak, that this is a sort of a sports fact of the home court advantage. But this is within chapter 11 here. Sun Tzu, this is the opposite. He's saying if you're too close to home, there's a chance that the morale is going to sag of the troops, and they're actually going to lose. The next I wanted to call attention to is the strategic ground, and this is Sun Tzu said this is where the general shines, so to speak. He says this is page 268. When the ground offers an advantage to either side, that is strategic ground. So there's no specific advantage offered within the strategic ground. But this is where the general can come forth and say, okay, he's going to do this, I'm going to do this. We have this sort of situation that's sort of neutral between the two of us, and it becomes purely a matter of mind as opposed to terrain in this sort of episode. Next, I wanted to pay just some brief attention to what we have here on page 276. Sun Tzu writes, on crossroad grounds form alliances, on heavy ground plunder. And this idea of plundering has been a bit of a headache for some of Sun Tzu's commentators, who want to view him as being a little bit more moral than I'm trying to say that he is. And you see some of these commentators who've tried to clean up Sun Tzu, for example, saying that this is indeed the Chinese text should read, do not plunder. And our translator says this is hogwash. Of course he says plunder, and there's no sense in trying to clean up what he says there. So that's just to make the point that there are different opinions on what Sun Tzu's up to, and some people really want to see him as being more sort of caring than the text would have us believe that he is. So throughout these studies of the different kinds of grounds, Sun Tzu repeatedly makes the point that there are certain kinds of things that you can do on certain kinds of grounds, and certain kinds of things that you can't. So in the example we just saw, on crossroad grounds form alliances, so where there's the opportunity to do that and make friends. On heavy ground, plunder. So if you're already sort of inside the situation, you can't get more supplies brought to you, then just take advantage of what's there. On intractable ground, where you can't sort of make camp, keep marching. On enclosed ground, devise stratagems. And then the next one I'm going to look at is here, on death ground, fight. So this is not a particularly advantageous situation for Sun Tzu. I don't think he's saying that fighting is a great thing. Fighting is, in this situation, what you have to do when you're on death ground. So I wanted to skip just a little bit here to where he starts to mention the mentality of the troops on page 281. 281 he writes, devise stratagems that cannot be fathomed. Throw your men where there is no escape, and they will die rather than flee. Men who have faced death can achieve anything. So this can be considered a kind of a death ground. When men are in the death ground, or when they think that they're in the death ground, where they have to fight or die, they're going to fight, and they're going to fight very well. They're going to fight better there than they would in other sorts of situations where they can take advantage of things that are around them. And there's the second point here, and they will die rather than flee. Men who face death can achieve anything. Within the death ground, there's nowhere to go. You've resolved to fight. There's no sort of plan of escape, and so you say, well, I'm going to die, or I'm going to live by fighting for my life. But fleeing is just not going to be an option there. Sun Tzu goes on to describe the mentality of soldiers who are within this death ground. He writes, men who have faced death can achieve anything. They will give their last drop of strength, officers and men alike. Troops in desperate straits know no fear. Where there is no escape, they stand firm. Where they have entered deep, they will persist. When they see no hope, they fight. They are alert without needing discipline. They act without needing instructions. They are devoted without needing a compact. They are loyal without needing orders. So here he says that as far as from the general's perspective, death ground, or the feeling that one is going to die unless one fights one's way out, brings out the best in a soldier. This is the general sort of dream soldiers. Everything runs smoothly, and there's nothing to hamper their discipline or their resolve. And finally, if we can look briefly at the sort of what happens before we get this resolve, when one is sort of making up one's decision that one is going to submit oneself to a general and go off to war and face death and willingly die. This is on page 283 of our text. On the day they are ordered into battle, they sit up and weep, wetting their clothes with their tears. They lie down and weep, wetting their cheeks. So we have this image of saying goodbye to life, that the soldier has resolved himself to die, and having made that resolution is able to fight better. I feel like I should say, since I'm talking a lot about what soldiers think and soldiers feel, and I'm sort of going off Sun Tzu, I've never been a soldier, I've never been in this sort of a situation, and I realize that I'm sort of speaking a little bit as an academic and someone who's has a poverty of knowledge in this instance. So any of you who have relevant experience, I really look forward to your comments and helping me and helping all of us bring this text to life a little bit more with your own experiences.